One of the encouraging things sometimes is to hear little voices in the sanctuary. You know, there's nothing that says the sanctuary has to be this cold and sterile and, silent place. You know, if you hear a child make a noise, or if you hear a child cry or something, that might can throw us off for a second, and that might can distract us. But at the end of the day, that shows life.
Striving for superior theology and denominational unity. One joke at a time. Your Calvinist podcast begins now.
Welcome to Your Calvinist podcast. My name is Keith Foskey, and I'm not just any Calvinist. I'm your Calvinist.
I'm your
Calvinist. And I'm welcoming today the most beautiful woman in all the land, my wife, Jennifer Foskey, who is with us today in the studio. This is the Theo Shed and our home studio, and she is with me today to discuss the subject of family integrated church. And the reason for this is I did a video last week that was entitled Red Flags When Visiting a New Church. And we had a super patriotic church. We had a woke church. We had a church that just wanted your money. So we had a bunch of different churches that we were sort of teasing and joking about in that video. But the one that got a lot of attention, I was surprised, was the church that said, we called it the Way Church, Church on the Way. And that church was one where no children were allowed in the sanctuary.
No way.
Yeah. You actually, I want to give Jennifer the props on that. That was her joke. She says, children in the sanctuary?
No way.
No way. That's right. Welcome to Church on the Way, where everyone is welcome in our worship center, except children who are required to either go to Way Nursery, Way Children's Church, or Way Youth, because our pastor does not like any distractions and his sermons are not always G-rated. Kids in the sanctuary, we say, no way. So a lot of people have commented on that video and said, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with the church that doesn't want to be distracted? And then some people have said, well, we don't want distractions when we're worshiping. What's wrong with having a place for children to go? And what's wrong with things like children's church and nurseries and stuff like that? So first of all, I want to say in defense of the video, the red flag in the video is all about a church that forbids children in the sanctuary.
Right.
Yeah, when we wrote that joke, when we were writing that skit, and by the way, for those of you who don't know, Jennifer helps me write my skits. She is brilliant, she's funny, and she is beautiful. So I am a blessed man, and she helps me write all my skits. Well, as we were writing that, we remembered that there was actually a church where we saw that.
Yeah.
There was a man online. I'm not going to mention his name. He ended up being defrocked, though. He ended up being put out of his church. And this man said, in no uncertain terms, children are not allowed in the sanctuary because my sermons are not G-rated. And I said, wow, I'd never heard anyone say anything like that before. So go ahead.
And some of this has come from our own experience. When we travel and go on vacations, we visit churches, and we've been told several times, like, no, your children belong in here. Keep them with us.
Yeah, we want them in the sanctuary with us. No, why don't you put them here? Yeah, and sometimes we get 4 or 5 people come up to us. Hey, can we take your kids? And the answer is
no.
Yeah. And in line with all of this, one person commenting on the YouTube video asked if we would be willing to do a video on family integration. And because a lot of my videos do flow out of people who ask questions and they flow out of interest, that's what today is all about. And that's why I invited Jennifer, because Jennifer is obviously my wife. She's I'm the pastor of Sovereign Grace Family Church, and she's my wife. And so we do ministry in a sense together. I mean, I'm
the first lady. Where's my hat?
You gotta get the first lady hat. Okay.
And a piano.
That's funny. Yeah, she's the first lady. Yeah. Okay. A lot of churches do have that. They say that, but it's definitely not something we say in our church.
Yes.
So But one commentator, again, I'm saying it again, one commenter said, hey, could you do a show about family integration? So that's what today is about. But before I go further, I want to throw up right now a quick reminder that I'm going to have in all my podcasts moving forward. Hey guys, I just want to quickly say thank you for watching this episode. And if you're enjoying it, please hit the thumbs up button. If you're not enjoying it, hit the thumbs down button twice. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And some of you've asked about how to support the channel. If you'd like to support us, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/yourcalvinist and leave a donation. Most importantly, we want to make sure that everybody who hears this podcast hears the gospel. The word gospel means good news, and that good news has to be preceded by some bad news. And the bad news is this, that we are all sinners. Sin is breaking God's law, so we stand guilty before the Lord of the universe. But the good news is God sent his Son into the world to pay the penalty for everyone who would believe in him. Jesus came into the world, lived a perfect life, and he died a substitutionary death for everyone who will believe. And he calls us all to repent of our sin, to turn from our unbelief, and trust in him as Lord and Savior. And if you've never done that, I encourage you to do so today. Now back to the show. Okay, so we're back. Before I go any further, I do want to do a little fun game with you, Jennifer, before we get into the meat of the show. Yeah, I didn't say I was going to do this, but I've been bringing back the Would You Rather. I enjoy Would You Rather, and I've been kind of making this like personal and somewhat individual. So, would you rather, you get to choose one, but only one. Would you rather go to a Bible conference where Allie Beth Stuckey was speaking? I know I know you.
You're going to take me to the Founders Conference?
Well, unfortunately, we can't make it to the Founders Conference. Would have enjoyed it. I will be, but throwing that out though, I am going to be interviewing Scott Callahan from the Founders, who is head of their, or is I guess he's the head. He's leads up their Institute of Public Theology. He's going to be on the show in a few weeks. So we're big fans of the Founders. I'm very thankful for them. So would you rather go to a Bible conference with Allie Beth Stuckey, who's speaking, or would you rather go to a music concert with Andrew Peterson?
Oh man, that's...
I know
can we
you don't
combine them in one.
Yeah, okay.
And can I sit in the front row?
But if you had to choose,
I think I would go with Andrew Peterson.
Okay, I know you love Andrew Peterson, and I know we both
celebrate.
You celebrate his entire catalog. There's an Office Space reference for my Office Space fans out there. Okay, well, being that is on our mind right now, I have been given 2 books. Actually, I've been given 3 books to give away, but I'm only going to give away 2 on this show. I'm going to give away one on a different show. But I have 2 books that have been given to me by a listener, a longtime listener and good friend, but asked to remain anonymous, and has asked that we give these away on the show. This is Golden Booklet of the True Christian Life by John Calvin. It is a devotional booklet, and I have 2 to give away today. So here's how I'm going to give them away. This is going to be like first time or kind of first out of the box. The listener who is listening now and comments, would you rather go to a Bible conference with your favorite Bible teacher or go to a music concert with your favorite musical artist? That's what you have to put, and you have to put who it is, your favorite Bible teacher or your favorite musical artist. The first 2 people who leave a comment with the answer to that question will receive a message from me to contact you to send you one of these books. So it's my way of saying thank you for listening, and thanks again to the person who sent me these books to give away. So thank you so much for that. All right, so the title of today's show is 10 things, or rather, things that we've learned after 10 years as a family integrated church. And first of all, I think to help get us started, we should actually answer the question, what is family integration? Because a lot of people have never heard of that. And when I mention family integration to people, sometimes I just get like blank looks. People just kind of, what are you talking about? So family integration means that the children are not separate from the parents in the worship service. So that means there's no children's church. Sometimes there's no nursery. We're going to talk about that in a little while. But basically, the goal of family integration is that people be together in the worship service, children and their parents. And there's different ways that churches do this. There's absolute family integration where there's no Sunday school, where there's no nursery, where there's no children's church, there's no after church activities that involve just children. And those are like strict family integrated churches. And then there are churches sort of like ours where there's a mix. Like we have our children in an age graded Sunday school. So that's something that we do at Sovereign Grace Family Church. And then there's something called family equipping. And family equipping, we have some friends who, instead of using the term family integrated, because there is some a little bit of baggage that goes along with that, there's some history behind that movement. Family equipping, I think, came out of Southern Seminary. I think that term came out of Southern Seminary, but I could be wrong about that. But family equipping basically is a similar concept where we want to equip the parents to minister to their children, and therefore we want the children and the parents to be together in the worship service. And I would say that's similar to what we're doing, but we're more family integrated in that we don't have a youth group. A lot of family equipping churches will still have a youth group and things like that. So it really is, again, there is no it's hard to make a hard and fast definition, but essentially the idea is that we, like when people ask me, do we have a youth pastor? My answer is we have 40 youth pastors. Yeah. And because every father in our church, and maybe we don't have 40 fathers, a smaller church, but you know, they using that term, we have 40 youth pastors. What I'm saying is every father who has children in the home has the opportunity to be to his children a teacher of the word, and to his wife a teacher of the word. 1 Corinthians 14 says, if you have a question, what are you supposed to do?
Go to Google. No.
Look at there.
Ask your husband.
Yeah, ask your husband at home, right? So that puts I've always said that puts the onus on the man. That the man's responsibility is to know the word, so that if his wife has a question, she can go to him and feel confident that she's going to get an answer that is from the word. Right. And so we really take we believe it's very important to teach fathers and mothers, but fathers specifically, to lead their families well. And so that's a big part of the family integrated movement. Now, Jennifer, when did we adopt family integration? Because I said the title of the show is 10 years, but we've actually
longer than that.
Yeah, that's just going to make a good thumbnail, you know.
Yeah, I think maybe as early as like 2010, maybe 2011.
Well, we know when we changed the name of the church, and for those who don't know, our church used to be it was Salivate. No, no, it used to be Forest Christian Church. And we left. We were part of the old Disciples of Christ Church back when I was a kid, because I've been in this church since I was a kid. We were part of the old Disciples of Christ Church. That stopped in '99, and then we became Reformed 2009, 2010, and then we decided to change our name to go along with the Reformation that we were experiencing in 2011. So we became Sovereign Grace Family Church in 2011. And that's about 12 years then, I guess. Well, again, I'm bad at math. But by that point, we had already started taking steps, though. Yeah. We had already, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute, some of the steps that we took. But do you remember who the biggest influences were in that time? Who was influencing us in the way of family integration?
Probably Vodi Bakum.
Okay.
We're learning more about what that looks like with him. I mean, through him and through his like family-driven faith.
Yeah, he wrote the book Family Driven Faith, and there were other guys. I can't remember names right off the top of my head, but Vodi was a big voice for that at the time. Obviously, probably still is. It's not something I hear as much anymore. But I don't listen to him as much anymore. I love Vodi, but time doesn't allow me to listen to a lot of what he's doing now. I'm sure he still supports family integration. There's also a film that came out that was called Divided. And Divided talked about the history of youth groups and how they began, and the history of Sunday school and how it began. And what did you think about Divided when you saw it?
I'm thinking back to it, trying to remember. I mean, I remember watching it, and I remember thinking that there were some good ideas with it, but I also thought it maybe carried it a little bit too far.
Yeah, I
makes
remember
sense. I
when I
had mixed
first
feelings.
watched Divided, I felt like some of the arguments that were being made weren't necessarily biblical arguments. It was like they had a foredrawn conclusion and they were just drawing, and making their arguments based on their already foredrawn conclusion. And that's something you have to be careful of with any movement, is people who are automatically, they already have their decision made. And now they're just going to find whatever goes along with that decision. And again, this is nothing against the people who made Divided, and I would recommend people to watch it. There's good information in it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I just remember watching it thinking it didn't feel very balanced. It didn't feel very fair. Because I do want to say, I do think that there are very good people who do youth ministry.
Yeah.
There are very good people who do children's ministry. And I do think there can be a place for those things. In fact, I just interviewed a few weeks ago on my show Greg Steer, who does Dare to Share Ministries, and that is a youth-oriented ministry. And I think Greg is a great guy, and I think he's sharing the gospel, and I think he cares about people's souls. Yeah. So this is in no way intended to say that it can't be done, and it can't be done well. And I think that's where anytime there's a belief or an idea, we tend to divide and set up camps and say, oh, well, they're on the other side, therefore they're wrong or they're evil or something like that. And I think that's the negative. But like I said, I would still encourage people to watch Divided, learn what's in it. But I just remember having some mixed feelings.
And I think you can watch it and apply truths to your church. I mean, where, like you said in the beginning, it's not, you have to do it this way, this exact way. It's,
yeah, learn. Yeah, as they say, the old saying goes, it's kind of cheesy, but right. You eat the meat and spit out the bones, right? Yeah. So you can do that for sure. So when we became family integrated, and again, it was a process. Do you remember what the initial reactions were?
More shock, and I remember some of the parents being very upset by it.
There was some negativity.
It was strange because at that time it was like I heard a lot of cheering and a lot of excited people, like especially some of the newer members that were coming to church that had come from a family integrated type environment.
Or came because they wanted family integration. Yeah. Some people had come. I remember some friends of ours had come from a church where they felt like their children weren't allowed in the sanctuary.
Yeah.
And so when they came to us, they were excited that they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I heard the voices of some, other members that were more upset. So
yeah. And again, this is 13 years ago, 12 years ago, however long ago it was. Huh?
It's a little foggy.
Yeah, it is a little foggy. But I just remember very specifically, I preached a sermon. And again, nobody's perfect, right? And not everything I've ever said from the pulpit has been perfect, and I've repented many times of things that I've said that were wrong. So I want to say this right away. I preached a sermon. I was excoriated for it, and I probably did have some things in it that were uncharitable to people who disagree. And so looking back with a few more years of wisdom, I'd like to think wisdom. With a few more years of wisdom, I look back and I say, okay, yeah, well, I could have done that better. I could have handled. I could have been more gracious. I could have been more. I could have been more charitable towards those who disagree. And so there was some difficulty there. And one of the things that was not necessarily an unfair accusation, even though it was a little hard to hear. People were like, well, you were a youth pastor, not you, but me. Yeah. They were saying, you were a youth pastor, therefore you're a hypocrite because you're now saying that youth ministry is not good and you were a youth pastor. Therefore, you're saying you were wrong. And in a sense, I was. Because you remember when we were working with the youth and I was the youth pastor, a lot of the things that I did weren't gospel-centered.
No.
I'm able to look back now at where I was at 24 years old, leading a youth ministry, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I wasn't doing it very well. And the youth ministry was larger because I had a fun personality, but it wasn't really gospel-centered. I mean, I worked hard, and I learned as I was going to seminary and things like that. But I know my own failures, in what I was doing then. But anyhow, I remember this transition was very hard.
Honestly, the way I think when I look back, it was like we were doing like some youth group games and sort of a big Eva style, and
Yeah.
trying to rein that into as the theology shifted. We didn't have room for that stuff anymore, but we still had relationships. We were still building relationships, and we still have them now. I mean, we'll talk about the way it is now.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it's funny. I recently found some notes from a journal that I had kept from years ago when we were kind of going through a struggling time. And a lot of times I keep up with things. I just sort of journal my ideas or thoughts. And I found a journal that we had, or that I had written, and it included an interaction that I had with someone about family integration. And there was a lot of negativity in that conversation. And looking back at it now, reading it now, I may have approached that differently now than I did then. Not any less convinced that what we were doing was right, but maybe just a little more gracious and how I would have approached it. Because you know, once we finally pulled the trigger, we quit cold turkey.
Yeah.
As I said, we transitioned. The first transition was we stopped children's church. But then eventually it was no youth group, no children's church, no Sunday school. I mean, we did that for a while. It was, you know, none of that. Now there was a Sunday school class, but it was an adult class and kids could go in with their parents, but there wasn't any age graded Sunday school. There was no youth group. There was no nothing. And stopping that, kind of quitting cold turkey like that, some people were upset. And I remember very specifically a family that wanted their son to go to a youth group. Or not a youth group, I'm sorry, a children's church. They wanted him to go to children's church during church. And when we stopped having it, they were quite upset with what was going on. And again, I'm not saying they were wrong. I'm saying that this was what we dealt with in making this transition. And, you know, but as you said already, we had people coming into the church who were looking for that. So it was like we had some people who were in the church who were already wanting that. And I will name one name here, Byron Starkweather. He was one of our elders, and he's no longer with us. He's in Tennessee now. He moved up there. But when he came to the church, he said, my son's not going to children's church. My son's going to sit here and worship with me. And his son was little. Stephen at that point was young. He's huge now. But Stephen was a little boy at that time. And he said, my son's not going to go to children's church. Okay, great. And then... you know, there were kids going to children's church. There weren't kids going to children's church. But when we brought everybody together and brought everybody in to the service and eliminated children's church, there were a few people who were upset. But then people started coming who wanted that. So again, just kind of, I know we're sort of repeating ourselves at this point, but that's how that transition happened.
Can I mention something?
Yeah. Over
the years since that time, it's been amazing that you get. I mean, several, I don't know how many you have, but where the children, you know, they're drawing maybe while they're listening. And I mean, you get the text of the sermon, you get pictures of you like, you know, preaching, you get questions, you know, from the youth. I mean, they're far more capable than maybe what you may think. I mean, even our own children now, I mean, the things that they are able to talk about, and they remember the text. They can show me in the Bible where it is. They can ask questions that go along with the sermon that they wouldn't get if they were. I mean, so I see the other side of it also as a...
Yeah, in a minute we're going to talk about some of the benefits, but right away, just what you just said, I can't tell you how many times young kids have come up to me after service and have handed me a piece of paper where they had written out the entire text that I had preached, or they had drawn pictures of the screens, because I put the words of the text on the screen, and sometimes I'll have my outline on the screen, and they will have written the outline of the screens, or some of them draw a picture of me, which is just, you know, usually a square box for the pulpit and a big bearded man behind the pulpit, and which is nice. But yeah, it's amazing what we see now.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. Over the years, even though it was polarizing in the beginning, it wasn't polarizing long.
No.
The people who wanted it, it was just good. For people who were not comfortable with it, some of them got comfortable with it and figured it out, and it worked out. And, there were some people who were just really unhappy. I don't remember if we lost anyone over it. I don't think so, but I could be wrong again. We're talking years and years ago. It was polarizing for a bit, but then over the years, things normalized and it just became who we were. It wasn't a debate anymore.
No.
In fact, it became, we put it on our website. It says on our website, family integrated. When Brother Collier came to the church, that was one of the things that he was looking for. He's one of our elders now. He told me, he's looking for a Reformed church, Baptist church, and a church that was family integrated in its worship. That it wasn't, youth groups and all that stuff. He wanted the kids in with him in worship. So these are things that are all. I remember these conversations, and it was part of what people knew us for, and that's good. That's not why we did it. But it did drive sort of defined us in a sense as to we're focused on having the family together in worship, not because we don't want to have a children's church leader, not because we don't want to have not because we don't have people who could do that, but because that's not our goal.
Right. The high point of our service is listening to the word. So, we want, the volunteer children's church leader. We want everybody. We want the entire family to sit under the preaching, your expositional preaching.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things early on we did start noticing the need for, though, and this is going to lead us into a little bit of the next part of the conversation, was the need for a nursery. Yeah. Because lots of family integrated churches still recognize the need to offer some type of help to parents at a very, very young age. And our nursery is birth to 3 years old. And that's sort of the 4-year-old is when we start saying, okay, let's start bringing him in the sanctuary, start teaching him or her how to sit, deal with them, discipline. If there are discipline issues, here's some ways you can do that, but we've sort of struggled a little bit with our nursery, trying to figure out the best way to do it. Because like with us, we don't, even earlier than 3, we really don't want to put our kids in the nursery if we don't have to. Right. So like with Theo, Yeah,
he's only 15 months now. But I try to get through at least the music with him until we're in the nursery.
Yeah. You keep him in there as long as possible.
Yeah. Every week the goal is a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. And if we go back to our other ones, obviously we have 2 children who were adopted that they didn't, they came to us at 4 and 6 years old. So we didn't go through this with them, but from Hope and JJ and Faith, each of them, same thing, right? They were little and we had to struggle through the nursery period. So there is a time early on where parents have to struggle with how they're going to do that. Are they going to make use of the nursery service of the church if the church has that? Or are they going to try to, as you do, sort of struggle with, having them as long as you can, as long as we're not, because the other thing, we don't want to be a distraction.
No.
We don't want our children to distract others. But I will say this about that real quick. One of the things as a pastor, one of the encouraging things sometimes is to hear little voices in the sanctuary. There's nothing that says the sanctuary has to be this cold and sterile and, silent place. If you hear a child make a noise, or if you hear a child cry or something, that can throw us off for a second, and that can distract us. But at the end of the day, that shows life. Yeah. That shows that the church is growing by the most natural means possible. We're growing through our children, and so we've been to churches that have, I think, a useful tool, and that's a cry room.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I've used it when we've gone out.
Yeah. We don't have one at our church, and it's at this point it's not an impossibility that we may one day. It's just not something that we have pulled the trigger on. We've been doing some construction things recently. A cry room is a possibility at some point, but basically, if you don't know what that is, it's a room where you're still in the sanctuary, but you're separated by glass and soundproofing, and so a person can take their child in there. And some churches call it training rooms. And because you still want to feel like part of the worship service. Whereas instead of going away to a distant room where you're in a nursery where you're separated, you're actually still in the sanctuary. You're just behind a wall that allows you to still be visibly present, and you hear through the speakers. And that's, again, they sometimes call it a cry room or a training room. I think there's one at Ligonier, isn't there?
Yeah, there was.
Or not Ligonier. What's it called?
St. Andrew's.
St. Andrew's Chapel, which is R.C. Sproul's, was R.C. Sproul's church before he passed. And when we go there, we usually sit near the cry room, right? So you can just step over. If Theo is crying, you just step over there.
Still feels like you're part of the service, but you're not. It's private.
Yeah, you're private. And again, because you don't want to be overly distracting.
Right.
And you understand that. And so, in the video, when we made the little video of the person saying, the pastor doesn't like distractions, we realize there are times where children are distracting. That can happen. And so we take the child out if they're distracting, and we bring them back in. We if there's discipline that needs to be done, or maybe calming them down or whatever, depending on their age. If it's an older child, there may be, like with ours, if Hope or JJ are acting out in church, they're going to be disciplined because they're old enough to know better at this point, and even Faith. So it just depends on the child. And with that in mind, I want to very quickly, I want to say here's our structure. I wrote this out, just say, here's the way that our church is set up. And this is not in any way to say this is the model or this is the right way or this is what you should be doing. But if somebody says, well, what Sovereign Grace look like? Okay. Currently, we do have age-graded Sunday school. So even though we're family integrated worship, we still have age-graded Sunday school. Yeah. We aren't opposed to youth-specific events. And that's usually centered around the Sunday school. Like we had a youth Christmas party, but it was the Sunday school Christmas party because all the younger Sunday school classes went together. We're not even necessarily opposed to youth group meetings. We had for a while something called Young Disciples. So, again, we're looking at this 10 years later, 12 years later. This is what we have learned and seen, and these things are okay. They're fine. They're not hurting anything as long as we're not. The big thing that we want to make sure is that the Lord's Day worship, the family is together.
Right.
And because that has been the norm of church history. I mean, think about the benefit, and this is something I want you to consider if you're listening to this. Think about the benefit of a child sitting in church, looking at dad, looking at mom, worshiping side by side with them, seeing that happen, and growing up where that's the norm, where I'm worshiping beside mom and dad. I see dad holding his hymnal, singing hymnal. Sorry. We have a screen.
Gazing at the screen.
Looking at the screen and singing. We see mom and dad holding their Bibles, and that we do encourage people to hold their Bibles. And we see them turning the page and following the pastor's sermon. We see that the child is seeing this, and it is encouraging their participation within the body. One thing that I heard Vodi say, and I've heard other people say, and I've said it myself, is that sometimes churches so divide the body that if a person grows up in the church, they never graduate to church because they're always in some other part of church. So they start out in nursery, and then they go to children's church, and then they go to youth church, and then they go to the young adults, and then they go to young marrieds, but they never feel like they're part of the body. Family integration has this idea where you're encouraging their participation in the body from the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's if somebody said that, what's your reasoning? I want my children to be in worship as early as they can.
And this may be a side note to what you're saying also, but I think it's important for parents, unless there's illness or sickness or the occasional, going out of town or some reason like that, but you need to be in church every week doing that, because I think if your children also see Well, we only go once or twice a month, or we're not sure when the next time. I mean, on the Lord's Day, your family needs to be there in worship.
Yeah, it's consistency.
Consistency.
Yeah, it's harder to be consistent if you're not there.
It's more difficult to train your small children that way too.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. So I want to bring up some objections I have heard against family integration. I want to hear your thoughts. I'm going to give my thoughts, but these are objections that I have been told directly or that I've read or had people give. First objection is, well, kids don't understand.
They understand a lot more than you think they do. I mean, even at the youngest. So I would.
That's exactly right. Some people say you have to bring it down to their level. Not always. Children are amazing at being able to pick up and discern and understand things that we don't normally think that they could or would. So right away, the idea that the children are not going to understand, not always.
No.
Now, there are things where when I'm preaching, I do assume there are some things that may go over the head of some children. There are some things that I preach that may go over the heads of some adults. That's just the reality of, when I'm preaching, I have to consider, what I'm saying and am I being clear? And sometimes I'll even say, did that make sense? And I'm not saying that because I don't think it made sense, but because I'm looking out and sometimes I see these, like deer in headlights, and people, okay, look, I feel like that didn't make sense. Did that make sense? Like the time,
I know what you're going to say.
I'm preaching and I made an illustration about the world being round. And I said something about that, about
East and
West and North and South. And one of the older men in the church turned to his friend who's sitting next to him. They're in the second row. And he goes, I didn't understand that at all.
Out loud.
Very loud. And it so got I stopped and I said, did you didn't understand? He goes, nope, not a clue. So it doesn't have to be just young people who won't understand it. That's, I understand that's my job is to seek to clearly present the word of God to the people of God. And so that's my job.
And another thing, I mean, when you're talking to the same audience, I mean, some are regenerate, some are unregenerate. We don't know.
That's right.
I mean, I think there are regenerate children that are there could be, in our audience that through the Spirit, I mean, they're able to discern things that.
The Spirit of God is the teacher. Mm-hmm. So the second thing, they'll say kids don't understand. The second thing, kids will be bored.
Well, they're bored adults. You looking down the line and you see someone.
Yeah, it's like, that guy's on his cell phone. That's it. That guy's playing Galaga. He didn't think we'd notice, but we did. Okay, that was my Avengers reference. Okay, so bored. What are your thoughts on that, though? That shouldn't be the reason.
No. I mean, come on. I mean, really, they're bored at school. I mean, they're bored. I mean, but okay, this is number one. I mean, I think you could say that about the adults. You could apply that same standard because some people are there. They're not there to worship God or glorify God. They're there because maybe their wife or their husband dragged them to be there.
Yeah.
They're not there for the right reason. I mean, same for children. I mean, we bring them to church. They don't always want to go. Well, anyway, that might be, but that's not a good enough objection.
Yeah. And I would say this, how to alleviate that. If you have children in church and you're concerned with them being bored, sit closer because the further you are away, I think sometimes it can feel disengaging. Help your children turn to Bible passages, right? Stand up, encourage them, stand up, sing along, help them to overcome that inhibition of fear of singing in public, right? I was, very thankful last week. I was sitting in the back because Brother Adam was leading the music. So I was sitting in the back during the music and I could hear JJ singing. Yeah. So that's encouraging to me. I hear my son sing because he's been in church. He knows that's what we do. And so as far as boredom, I think that's, you can help overcome that.
And also through family worship time, and other times, reading the Bible, because anybody that I think says the Bible is boring, I mean, maybe that's the implication, I don't know. hasn't read the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, really,
I think there are. I
there's
think there
every-
could be some boring preachers out there, but hopefully that's not me. I don't want to be boring.
Not at all.
The third thing that I hear people say, well, kids need to be taught on their level. I know this is all sort of the same thing, but just different ways. Kids need to be taught on their level. What do you think?
Where's the flag?
Well, again,
know.
I think
just
the
think-
argument there, it goes back to what we've already said. Kids can learn more than we think they can. We can raise the level. Yeah, I was told in seminary that you shouldn't teach above a middle school level. And I have spent the last 20 years just seeking to repudiate that, because I think that most of the people in our church graduated high school. Many of them went to college. There's no reason why we have to dumb things down.
No.
But we do try to explain things clearly, taking difficult concepts and bring them to a digestible.
Well, more than once I've had JJ ask, like, I didn't understand when Daddy said this. Or what does this mean?
Isn't that a beautiful question?
I mean, it gives you an opportunity to talk to them about it.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's been times, honestly, where I've been like, I don't understand what you
I didn't know what he said either. You with that one guy. I ain't got a clue. That's my bad.
So,
What about this one? Kids distract others.
I mean, that would again go like, what? I mean, I would want to push back to that. Like, what kids? I mean, I don't think any parent, I mean, as a mom of a toddler, I mean, if he starts to cry or starts to wail or scream any of his shenanigans, I mean, I'm grabbing him with a trail of Cheerios, like walking
Shenanigans.
out.
At 1 year old, does he have shenanigans?
Total depravity, man. It's a real thing. So, I mean,
Okay.
we're trying to make our way out. And I mean, if we distract anyone, we're not intending to, we're trying to. So, I mean, I don't know anybody that just lets their kid scream, just continuously scream.
Yeah.
We have a special needs daughter also, and it's the same thing. If she
And it was a struggle with her. That's a good point. I'll throw that out there. We have a daughter with autism, and she is high on the spectrum. She's very intelligent, but when she was younger, it was hard for her. And even now, she stems. Had a funny moment in Sunday school last week. Brother Mike's teaching and he's writing on the board, and I'm sitting next to her, and Brother Mike erases the board and he leaves a little mark that was like a G that he left the bottom of the G hanging. And she just got it without warning, gets up, walks over the board, erases it, and he just stops, look at her, and we all laughed because we're like, and I'm like, but that was just, she's like, I can't handle that. Can't leave. She had a little touch of OCD, like, you're gonna erase that board, you're gonna erase the whole board. You're gonna leave the part of it out. What about this one? This is because I'm with you. I think yes.
Explain more. What do you mean?
Yeah, when people say, well, kids are a distraction, they can be. But this is why we, encourage the parents to, to do whatever's needful to help them be less of a distraction. But I love this, and I want to mention this. When I went to the Fight Laugh Feast conference with the guys from Cross Politic this last year, man, there was kids all over that place. They invited kids into the worship area. It was the auditorium at the ARC exhibit. And there were kids everywhere. And every once in a while you'd hear a toy squeak. Every once in a while you'd hear something drop. Every once in a while. But overall, it was a wonderful experience. And I saw people brought their pack and play. Yeah. And I was like, that's genius. Yeah. Right? And so, I mean, I just loved it.
It's wonderful. They're welcome. It's not.
Yeah. And they said that from the beginning. We know kids make noise. We know that happens. It's okay. If you have to deal with it, if there's something that gets overly distracting, do something. But don't feel like you are, being a burden on other people. Yeah. We all know we're all doing our best, right?
Right.
So the most difficult thing, and I thought we'd talk about this for a minute. The most difficult issue that I have as a pastor felt like we've dealt with in a family integrated church is the subject of single parents who legitimately need help.
Yeah.
if you figure for whatever reason they're single, whether it's a person who's had a spouse die or gone through a divorce or whatever, doesn't matter. They're in a situation where they don't have a person coming to church with them, or even if a person is married but the other person doesn't come to church and they want to bring their kids. And sometimes they may have a smaller child that is a little more rambunctious and a little harder to deal with. And so that has been, I think, the most difficult thing, because, in some churches it would just be, well, send them to children's church and you don't have to worry about it. And now you get to rest. You get to take a break. But in a church like ours, there's more of a responsibility on the parent, either to have the child sit with them or to carry them out if the child is acting up. And if the child is acting up, then they're missing part of the service.
Yeah.
And they think to themselves, well, why do I even come? I mean, I'm just, from their perspective, right? Why do I even come if I'm not, if I have to just stand out in the lobby or whatever, because I can't get the child to behave. So I think, I want to hear your thoughts on
I
that.
have been there on that. Well, I have two thoughts on that. Like for a little bit older of a child, maybe 3 and up, 4 and up. I am basically on Sunday morning like a single mom, because you were preaching and you can't help me with disciplining the kids. So
that's hard to hear. I know what you mean, and I know I
have an older daughter too that is my right hand. She helps me.
I am very thankful for Ashley. Yeah,
she's
But it just I mean, I know what you mean, and I know we've said that before. No, I know you're not trying to hurt me. But in that sense, being
You've given
up there,
some looks from the pulpit.
well, and I've called our kids out from the pulpit. JJ, stop, and we're like, you gonna call me out next? Adults be like, pastor getting serious. So yeah, I know what you mean though. It didn't hurt my feelings. I was just saying I wish that as a pastor, there are times where I wish we just experienced that, where I'm standing next to you with the kids between us.
I love that when we go out of town.
That is great. That is one of the blessing. Yeah. So you said you had 2 things.
Yeah. Okay. So on Sunday morning, you're preaching. I'm, with our children, trying to manage them. And one thing that's been beneficial to me is to grab usually we have a couple of larger families at church, and I'll ask a teenager to come sit with us, or maybe a grandparent to come sit with us, or have someone with us. So if I have to take one child out, the others are still there and have someone to be there.
Yeah, and that was actually what I was going to say is I think the issue is solved through community.
Yes. So that's where I was going about the single parent. Having that friend come alongside of you, or that, we're in community as a church, So to have that, so if they need to go, take care of their child, or if that they want to model, like maybe what it looks like in a different home. I mean, we're all there together with the same.
Yeah. And this is where the benefit of having grandparent-like figures in the church who can help, or parents who have other children who can there was a week or 2 ago where you got called to help a family that had a baby, and they needed you to come sit with their kids at their house. So it was me and our kids at the church, and Ashley wasn't there.
Yes.
So what I did was I put our kids with other people who were willing to let them sit. Now, I wasn't dealing with the baby, but I was dealing with Hope and JJ. And so I put put them with, Faith was with Mom.
Oh yeah.
But still, I mean, same. I would have put her with Papa. And the one good thing, we do have my dad and mom, dad and stepmom are in the church. So, yeah, okay. So, but yes, community effort helps.
And our kids, especially our 2 older kids, I mean, church is full. Like, we call them aunts and uncles, and I mean, they still refer Aunt Kelly, Aunt Sharon, Aunt Chrissy. Like, we have a community of. I feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my blood family and I have my church family.
Absolutely. And so a single parent coming to a church that's family integrated, it may be a little tough in the beginning, but once you learn the people, once you get to know people, and once you realize that you're part of a community, there are people there to help you.
Yes.
And we want to help you because we want to make you feel like you're part of the body, and your children are part of the body. Yeah. or at least part of the worship, part of the people who are worshiping. All right, so my final thoughts are this, and then I want to get if you have any final thoughts. Does a church have to be family integrated?
No.
The answer is no. A church doesn't have to be family integrated. But I think any church that bans children from the sanctuary has a misplaced priority.
Yeah, I think that.
And that's where that video stemmed from. We are family integrated because we think it's the best way. And we do recognize there are things that we have to deal with. And we talked about them through today's show. But we think it has a value for the child. We think it has a value for the parent. So we think that there's value here. If another church doesn't do it the way we do, we're not saying, we're not condemning them. They don't have to do it our way, but this is the way we're doing it, and we're going to seek to do it to the glory of God. But I do have an issue with any church that would say your child is banned from the sanctuary.
And if I can add this in, just a couple final thoughts too, like 2 Timothy 3, 16, about all scripture being God breathed. I mean, my husband preached through the book of Genesis. I mean, there are times, I can think of a couple of the different narratives in there that you preached that are not G-rated.
Yeah.
You're preaching it to all, but can you do that with God's word? You're preaching word verse by verse, explaining the meaning of all the text. Everybody needs to hear that.
I remember using the phrase coitus interruptus. Look that up. Anon.
I remember that week, and I was like, I hope my very inquisitive 8-year-old son doesn't ask him any
What is
questions.
coitus interruptus?
Go talk to your dad.
Yeah. So there are times, right? And some people bring that up. They say that's a reason for not having children there, but it's not, and that's why. The parent has to be the one to consider. The good thing about our church is people know what I'm preaching on because I'm preaching through books. So they can read ahead and they know what's coming. And so they may want to consider how they're going to handle that. And know this, that I know there's children in the room too. So I'm considering that. I'm trying to teach to everyone and to keep that in mind as I'm teaching. So,
and I'd just like to say, if you're listening to this and you're a parent of a small child, because I know from experience with my other small children and my 15-month-old now, every week it's very difficult because I think, wow, if I stay home, I have all of this real talk, it's difficult every week because it's a lot of in and out of the sanctuary. It's, I'm taking care of him and I'm trying to listen to my phone or listen to the, screen. But I just feel like we're honoring God by coming and by being there. And I feel like he sees us. He's not distant, not far away. He knows, and we're training. This is just a very small window. Eventually, it's like when you're training them to sleep. Eventually, they will sleep through the night. Well, eventually your children will be able to sit through the whole worship service.
Boy, that's a great illustration. Because at first, your children don't sleep through the night. And at first, they may not sit through the worship service. Boy, that was a good thought.
Keep working. Keep trying. I have a lot of ideas. You can reach out, different things over the years that we've done, but and tried. But Mama, don't give up on it.
Let me say this right now. If you have a question about family integration, or you have a question directly to ask Jennifer, if you're a mom, maybe, and this is something that you struggle with, and you want to know some ways that have helped us, things like bringing them writing utensils and books and things that have helped them, have really helped Hope.
Fidget spinners,
whatever, right? The things that help them, those things that aren't distractions, but are helpful for them. If you want to contact us, you can contact us at calvinistpodcast@gmail.com. And if your question is directed towards Jennifer, just put that in the attention. Say, attention, Jennifer, and I will make sure she gets the email and either write you back or we may do a follow-up and respond. If we get enough interest, we'll be happy to do another follow-up video. Well, I want to thank you again for being the most lovely of all of my podcast guests. And of course, I want to thank you for all that you do for our family allowing the children to be in the worship service and caring for them and honestly being the one who has had to teach and discipline them as I've been up preaching and leading music and things. I'm very grateful for you. I'm very grateful for what you do, and thankful for the just the mother that you are. So I love you and I thank you. So again, thank you for being part of Your Calvinist podcast today. If you enjoyed this show, please hit the thumbs up button. If you didn't like it, hit the thumbs down button twice. Don't forget to leave a comment, especially if you are one of the first commenters. You have the opportunity to win this book, The Golden Booklet of the True Christian Life by John Calvin. And I want to ask you to please, if you enjoyed the show, don't only like it, but subscribe to the channel and share it with someone else. Thank you again for listening to Your Calvinist podcast. My name is Keith Foskey, and I've been your Calvinist. May God bless you.